Hello, everyone. It's now 11:30 GMT or 12:30 European Central Time, and it's time for our exclusive webinar. I'm very excited about this, not only because is this a world's first, but also it's our first time that we at Hardian have done an exclusive webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guests, Dr. Vera Odell and Professor Heinz Weendel, and we'll bring them into the chat now and they can introduce themselves. Hello both, how are you doing?
Great, thanks a lot for having us.
Excellent, thanks very much, you.
Brilliant. So I'm really excited to talk about Prof Valmed and the world's first regulatory clearance for a large language model. Congratulations, it's a fantastic achievement. Before we get into it, do you just want to both introduce yourselves? So we'll start with Vera, if that's okay.
Sure. So Vera Rödel, my name, and I'm a lawyer by profession. And together with Heinz, we founded Prof Valmed now 2 years ago. And although I have a legal background, I have a master's degree in medicine as well. So this brought us together, the two of us.
Yeah, my name is Heinz. I'm Heinz Weendel. I'm a professor of neurology. I'm an academic physician, very much being into the field of medical education, teaching, but also research. So to speak, coming out of the problem to solve a problem. And we basically teamed up in my position as chair of neurology at a university hospital in Freiburg to create a solution that is exploiting AI to transform healthcare.
It's really, really exciting. So obviously you've got a deep clinical background, very legal background. I think that's the perfect combination to bring the medical device to market. So tell us, what's it called? What does it do? What's the intended use? And then we'll move on to a demo shortly once we've gone through the basics.
So before I hand over to Heinz to explain what it does for the healthcare professional, as you said, I'm a lawyer, so we were inspired by the legal profession and by the legal tech tools that are around there. And in the end, we try to use what is out there for the legal practice and now have it rolled out in the medical world as well, and support the healthcare professional with a co-pilot like we already do have in the legal world as well. And what it can and cannot, I will hand over to Heinz.
Right, so you took inspiration from what exists in the legal world and have applied that to medicine. Brilliant. So Heinz, I think we're going to have a demo and you can explain the intended use and showcase what it does. Over to you.
Exactly. So let me explain what we started with and what we are now at. So we created a software tool that is intended as a co-pilot, and that's also the intended use to support therapeutic and diagnostic decisions. So it's a clinical decision support system. And the name Valmed comes from validated medical information. So Professor Valmed stands for validated medical information. And what we built is, and that you can see now on the shared screen, is a medical data library that is consisting out of manually and human curated types of validated medical information that represent the majority opinion of what almost all diagnostic entities and specialties need. First and foremost, it's guidelines, then it's regulatory documents, it's quality handbooks and patient handbooks. And to bridge the gap between, let's say, majority opinion, but also scientific actuality and recency, we integrated PubMed. We also integrated Cochrane, and then we have a typology that is compiling all the others. So what you can see is when you click on guidelines, you will actually have displayed all sources. So basically what the tool allows you is a very transparent insight into in what documents is the tool searching. So it's a closed data system currently consisting out of 2.5 million documents, which we believe is covering like 96, 90, 70% of the user inquiries. So you actually can click down to what your specific, let's say, society or entity is. And in the middle box, you can basically see displayed all the individual titles, and you can search down to a single document. That is a type, that is source, that is publication date. So you can also search by recency. And we do not have a very curated selection based on speciality, because we feel this is something that AI maybe is better at what the specialities themselves are. Then we have two principal functions. One is very simple, call it Google-like, a search function. And the other is exploiting the power of AI. It's a prompt function. And on the right side, you do see a history function. So it's very reminiscent of chatbots. And what you then simply do is to use the conversational power of a integrated LLM that is working in cooperation with our closed data system. And what it technically is a augmented knowledge retrieval system. So I'm pulling out from the history what I'm doing. For example, how do you classify subarachnoid bleeding? And then the tool is searching and is providing a meta summary that is currently just pulled out of history, but we can do also a live demo in a second if we want. The meta summary basically is compiling information, which is then listed as, let's say, literature citations, and that's the display of the so-called sources. And you can actually click on the sources and open them, and you will get a display of the respective sources where the tool has found the information from. So one thing that is extremely relevant to highlight is the system per se does not have very much creativity. It is required to have robustness and reproducibility from the available underlying literature repository. So once you're in this discussion, you can also refine and multi-shot the prompt. So I've here made an example of explain the Hunt and Hess scale in more detail. So this is one scale, how you classify the subarachnoid bleedings. And that is now the live part, the tool searches in relevant medical sources, tries to pinpoint most relevant sources to the respective prompt, and then you get an output of what the question is. So Hunt and Hess scale has 5 grades: grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5. This is now explained, and again you see the sources that you can actually look into further details. So this is the essential function, and as the intended purpose is, it helps and assists a medical professional in making diagnosis and treatment decisions. We might come into the specificities of the tool and the technicalities in a second. This is what we put extreme effort in two things to convince the notified body that this is a tool that is worth a CE grade Class IIb. Namely that it has reproducibility, very low grade of hallucination, and that is our primary endpoint. It has a very high safety index. So if the tool is creating an answer, the medical professional is following the answer, what is the risk in terms of a 100% follow of the answer? So that was a very big part of our discussions and our, let's say, quality management, technical documentation, but also clinical evaluation to create a safe product. safety is really first, and this is where also a key difference to open source LLMs and stuff is that in case of there is doubts or there is an unclear prompt, the system does answer, I don't understand, or I cannot answer, please go next and refine the prompt or whatever. So it's twisted towards safety because we are creating a product class which we call responsible medical AI or responsible trustworthy medical AI. I'm stopping here with a demo, and we can go further with the discussion.
So to sum it up, I mean, it's a software application for support of diagnosis and treatment as a medical co-pilot. And to add on what Heinz just said, so regarding the documents that we just saw and were discussing, they are publicly available, because I already saw the question coming up, what about the copyright in the chat? So we do not have any publisher documents in here, because we decided not to go with the publisher, not to have this bias, because we anyway will never have them all. So we agreed, and this is part of the registration as well, only to have those documents that we agreed on. So this is part of the CE mark as well. And as you asked the question, who will in the end use it? So it's not only the healthcare professional, but it's all the medical personnel. And this is, from my perspective, the big advantage here. Of course, you can have it in the used by a general practitioner, but you can also have it used by the nurses in the hospitals, in the clinics. And on the other hand, we already have it used in the pharmaceutical companies in their respective medical education or medical information departments that do receive the questions by the healthcare professional to be answered, and that would have to do research and can now use a software that provides this validated medical information and knowledge to them.
Great. Thanks for the demo, Heinz, and thanks for the explanation. You're right, the intended use is so important. So I just wanted to drill down into that a little bit. Obviously, every medical device has to have an intended use. There's a medical purpose behind it. So we've clarified that this is intended to help inform or drive management of patients. And you said it's intended to be used just by healthcare professionals.
Medical personnel, yeah.
And medical personnel. And are there any situations where it can't be used, or any intended users that are not allowed to use this?
So one thing with regard to the positive wording, what can it be used? It can be used in all medical fields, because this is often a misunderstanding. Heinz coming out of the field of neurology, so it can be used in all medical fields. And as it's to be, it can also be used in the emergency room. What it cannot be used is by layperson. So patients, although we were often asked this, cannot use it and would of course benefit, but this is the contraindication. And in the end, what is important for a lawyer to say, the decision to be made in the end is still with a healthcare professional and will never only be done by the tool. So it's only a co-pilot, it only assists and supports you in diagnosis and treatment.
And can it be used in any healthcare situation? And I'm specifically referring to sort of very critical care, intensive care, stroke medicine in the early phases. Would you recommend it's used then, or is your intent more for it to be used by a healthcare professional who has the time to interrogate your product?
It's approved in all situations, even in the emergency, and it is already used. So Heinz, perhaps you can build on the experience you now gained when using it in those situations. And this was one of our reasons to go for Class IIb, to have it used in any situation, in any medical field. And an additional point, but we'll come to this later, to be agile when it comes to the tech behind. This is another reason why we went for IIb.
And I think the choice of IIb is a good one, because it allows you to be allows you to be higher risk and to be involved in those healthcare situations where there is significant risk involved, cancer patients, trauma patients, things like that. Was that a deliberate choice? When you were faced with, we're going to get this regulated, was there that discussion where you said, shall we go 2A or 2B? And what made you decide to go down the 2B route?
this was, of course, a discussion that we internally had, so Heinz and myself, because the pathway to 2B is even more challenging than to 2A, and there was a lot of obstacles to overcome. But in the end, what we discussed and decided first, it will never be the tool that the tech behind the tool that is our USP. It will always be the approval, the CE mark, and the medical database. So we had to go for 2B because tech changes. We are only a medical professional and a lawyer, so we are not the tech people behind. And in the end, we thought we have to be agile here and have to take those improvements and just reflect them in our tool as well, without any delay of having to undergo approval again.
No, of course. And having that CE mark, well, first of all, you're the only people who've got it for this type of technology. So you own the market for now. I'm sure others will be wanting to follow shortly. I guess what people are going to be wondering is, can you explain a little bit about how you actually developed using a large language model, which I presume is a third-party one, without giving away all of your secret sauce? What kind of infrastructure you're using with your language model? How are you putting in guardrails, safety netting? How are you controlling and reducing hallucinations and things like that? If you could explain a little bit on the technical side, I think that'd be very interesting for everybody watching.
Sure.
So maybe I start first. So the starting point is a closed medical data architecture, a library, and one element to create best possible outputs is how do you process this library that is mostly consisting of PDFs that have been manually curated and annotated. How do you process it to give best possible outputs? The way it technically works is that certain documents that have highest majority opinion and regulatory relevance, which is guidelines and regulatory documents, have a certain higher priority towards being selected upon a prompt than other elements in these 2.5 million documents. And I saw just one question is, how do we guarantee actuality? So we update our database once monthly. And when opening and logging into the system, the most relevant documents that have been updated, so put into the database or removed, are indexed. So things like dear doctor letters, they won't get lost. And this is where you get notified. That's one thing. The other thing is that we have a so-called SOUP, software of unknown provenance. And we've played around quite a bit, but at this point it's GPT 4.0, which in our opinion gives pretty robust results in this reg augmentation combination with the database. We call the database the Medical Data Analysis Architecture Module, MDAAM. And technically, we've played around with how many documents you should actually select and process. We're currently, based on a prompt, selecting the best fitting 50 documents, 50, and then going down to something like up to 15 references that are displayed that are most compatible with. The system has the ability to exactly pinpoint to the text passage where the relevant block of the text is to be found in combination to the respective prompt. We first started with a very restrictive prompt guardrail. We were only allowed to put in 25 words. We are much more liberal now with the 2.0 version. But in case of any, let's say, inconsistency with the let's say this is the adverse question or this is not a medical question, the system blocks and says this is an error, we don't give an answer. There is there is one more thing that we've played around quite intensively is technical robustness. So in the development part, we tuned the system in a way that we created automatically hundreds and thousands of questions and let the system answer the same question a couple of times and looked for similarity of the output. And that was phase 1 out of 3 in our clinical development plan. So that was the pure technical demonstration of reproducibility, velocity, and robustness. The second part, and I'm already referring to our clinical evaluation plan, was testing in a hybrid way against board certified specialists. So our claim is that it has the level of output of a board certified specialist. And based on our power calculations, we defined a number of questions in each specialty that would be broad enough, but also not too broad to be manageable, to assume that it covers the field that we're requesting to cover. And the third part, that was phase 3 out of 3, was free testing by medical professionals, different specializations, but also different, let's say, professions. And that was a free testing where we required a number of questions had to be in the field of diagnosis and others had to be in the area of treatment recommendations. All in all, the total number of questions that was convincing enough by statistical power calculations to say this would justify that the system is safe, because the primary endpoint was safety index. I'm explaining in a second what it is, was approximately 900 questions. So that was separated for a two-digit number of individuals that tested the system, but the robustness could be demonstrated with something like 900 questions. And the primary endpoint for our clinical evaluation was, as I said, the safety index. Is an answer, a possible output, putting potential harm to the patient if the answer is followed directly, which we brought down in our system to 0.26 at this point in the version 2.0, which is quite remarkable. As I said, the downside is that it answers in some instances rather carefully, and you have to refine the prompt, but that was the downside and the price we had to pay to get it actually argued with our notified body.
Heinz, that is...
The second endpoint, if I may add that, sorry about that, is the response quality index. So how satisfied are you with the answer? And both of these endpoints are in a way not mathematical exact endpoints. They are human referenced. Okay, so because there is no real benchmark, we are currently doing benchmark studies with predefined questions and assessing similarity, but they have been referenced against humans.
Heinz, that is absolutely brilliant answer. There's a lot to unpack in that. I'm just going to sort of reiterate and go over some of the points you've made, because it's fantastic to see that you've clearly taken, well, the regulatory process very seriously, but also the clinical evaluation process seriously, which of course is part of the regulatory process. I wrote a blog almost a year and a half ago about describing how someone might get a large language model regulatory approved. And it seems like you've almost exactly copied that framework and
Yeah.
with a very highly curated database of information. And you've restricted the large language model to only be able to search that information. And you keep that database updated all the time. So, you know, that's point one. Point two is that you've clearly spent time refining the prompts and the architecture that you described so eloquently, so that you have probably got risk controls in place, which are required by the regulations, and you've probably you've tested that quite robustly. And then the third bit, which is the most fascinating bit to me, is the clinical evaluation. That was my next question, but you've already answered. You did it in essentially 3 phases. You've identified some kind of benchmark. So I think you mentioned safety index, response quality index. You've pre-specified your sample sizing. You've gone out and done that evidence and those studies, and you produced what the regulators want to see. Is you've started with a performance endpoint that you want to meet. You've done the studies properly to a powered, statistically relevant size of sample, and then you've shown the regulators, well, actually, we meet or exceed these benchmarks that we wanted to hit. And I think that really showcases like the power of following the regulatory pathway properly and doing it. I guess my question to you is, how much of a headache was all of that? Or did you actually find that it just made sense in terms of like the regulatory process? Or was there any part you kind of thought, I don't know why we're doing this bit?
Perfect summary, exact summary. Thanks for that, Hugh. And as a matter of fact, it created enormous headache on our side, but also on the side of the notified body, because they had no preceding example.
Yeah.
So we had to convince them about this process makes sense. And this is one key recommendation that I would like to give to the audience. I mean, the notified body, also for them, this was the first example how you would do such a new class of products. They are used to the defibrillators and technical devices where there are clear metrics and formula. This was all not really applicable. Some things were applicable, risk management plan and so forth, but we had to discuss with them in a very iterative way, and we had to convince them, the clinical experts, that this is the way we believe it can be best demonstrated. So since we didn't have a standard template, a blueprint how to do it, we had to do it ourselves, and that was the iteration process we had. So we had several exchanges with them, and in the end, this was the successful way to go.
I think that's fantastic, and it's important for people to understand that just because there's no precedent doesn't mean things can't be done. As long as you follow common sense scientific process and identify benchmarks of performance, and then go out and measure those scientifically. It's not about hiding from the hard science. It's about embracing that.
And allow me to add on, and although we of course are only approved in Europe yet, the notified body, and we focused on what is out there, and we of course took a look at the predetermined change control plans by the FDA and discussed this with the notified body, because in the end this was part and is the heart of the product, that it will change, the database will change, and the tech will change. So as you said, I mean, the notified body has to be willing, and we did have the people on board that were really willing to understand the tech, to understand the reason, and to support in this whole process. And please allow me to add, because some of the people were joining later and the question is coming up again and again. So it's for the support of diagnosis and treatment, of course, also for the diagnosis part. So dosage and drug information is also included, and for all medical fields. It was, as one of you said, endorsed by the neurologist, but this is just an endorsement supporting us on the way, but the intended use is for all medical fields. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you both. So yeah, we've covered sort of the clinical evaluation. I guess my last question on that is, are you planning on publishing any of that evidence? I mean, you don't have to, the regulations do not mandate you to publish these things, but I'm sure there'll be wide interest in the performance levels and how you conducted this. So is that something you're planning on doing?
We are definitely, but I think it links to, so what's next, what's to come. So currently we are being used in some clinics, some hospitals, by some healthcare professionals. And what we are currently looking for, as we are still bootstrapped, so we do not have an investor on board, as we were funded and paid by the pharmaceutical industry that enabled us. So in the end, I think everybody understands that this is the IP and the core and again, the heart of the product, this clinical evaluation. So if we now publish it, we will be easily copied. So what of course, we plan to publish it, but what we'd like to first do is really be incorporated in the clinical pathway to find a partner that is already in the hospitals, that enables us and the healthcare professional to use Prof Valmed and the other solution in a more easy way to increase the adoption rate. And this is the reason why we haven't published it yet, but of course our interest is in having this exchange. But as we are a small company and this is our IP, we first now look for a partner to really make it use and then go for the publishing.
I completely understand that tension between wanting to keep your secrets but also wanting to prove to people that you've done it properly. And I think for that reason, the regulations do not mandate that you publish clinical evidence that's used in a regulatory submission. The notified bodies keep them as a trade secret, and it's up to the company to decide whether or not. I wanted to go back to a point that you just made, Vera, about the PCCPs. And for those who aren't aware, these are called predetermined change control plans. Now, these are not part of the European medical device regulations. They're not part of MDCG guidance, but they have been proposed by the FDA, the American regulators. We as a consultancy have certainly used PCCPs in software devices in America. And in fact, the FDA now published a list of companies who've got PCCPs. So this is something that's quite common. I wanted to know, what was your interaction like with the notified body around PCCPs? Because obviously it's a new thing for them and it's not technically in the legislation in Europe. So I'm interested to know sort of what that conversation was like.
So, of course, as you said, it's no prerequisite in Europe, but the idea, I think, can easily be used. And as we first had Valmed 1.0 and went through the clinical evaluation with this version and weren't happy with the results. So for us, for the notified body, it would have been sufficient, but we said it will never be the product we want to go to market with. So it doesn't have the rate that we want to have. And the question was asked, we say that we save around 75% of time. So as we now achieved it with Valmed 2.0, we've agreed and we're transparent with the notified body that there will be a change and that there will be additional clinical evaluation needed. So the idea was used in the discussions with the notified body to explain to them that the quality management is fine and won't be touched, but still there are parts that need to evolve over time. So I think we didn't phrase it that way because it's the FDA and the European notified body want to have their thing, but in the end we did follow the idea of it.
Yeah, and I think it's important that people understand there is some flexibility in the system, and the regulators are not there to stop people. They want you to get to market, but they want you to demonstrate that it's safe and effective and it works.
Especially as you do have those planned device modifications here, and we were able to name them, quantify them, and explain it to the notified body. And this, I think, they always said they want to have it explained and understand the reason, and this is what we offered.
And presumably those processes of how you're going to change your software are documented in your quality management system.
Yeah.
And then the notified body has certified that as well, and then is happy for you to follow those processes. And I suppose when you undergo your surveillance audit in a few years' time, they will check that you follow those processes under your quality management system. Fantastic.
Yep.
Was there anything that the notified body asked of you that you found particularly difficult or maybe surprised you after your initial submission?
Couple of things. I mean, to start positively, they were open, as you realize, for discussions, and they were very open to be convinced, particularly why do we think we go this way to prove evidence for this and that. This is absolutely true. What is absolutely also true is that they were trying as much as they could through their common paths. And that made our life extremely difficult with regard to the way of documentation, quality management, technical documentation. I mean, if you're developing a software like that, it's pretty clear that you go 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, and again 4 steps forwards and 2 back, and this all has to be documented in a way that was sometimes difficult. I personally found it most difficult, but in the end, then successful, the discussions with the clinical experts, and therefore I had quite a good position because I'm very familiar to clinical trials and statistics and stuff. So that in the end convinced them. But in the beginning of the discussion, they did want something completely different. They wanted us to demonstrate superiority against the standard of care in a metric way, which is not possible.
Yeah. A very hard ask, that one, I can imagine. But you're right on the technical documentation. That's something we see a lot, is that people don't realize the amount of depth that you need to put into that technical documentation. And you know, I don't know how big your submission was, but we certainly see submissions up to thousands of pages of PDF documentation.
We're in here, yeah. We can hear you, yeah.
Yeah, you've been there, you've done that, exactly.
Yes.
The notified body falls over.
One other point that I think was difficult for us as a small startup, I mean, it's the 2 of us, and in the end, you do have to have positions in the company. So for the notified body, as we weren't having a person dedicated to the tech development in the company, but having it outsourced, of course, this was another obstacle, and we had to overcome it, and we had to have audits in this tech field as well. So I think for them it was new, as Heinz just said, as in the other field, but of course they had to cope with only the 2 of us being in several positions and all still fulfilling all the requirements.
Brilliant. I think, sorry, my sound just changed. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yep.
Yeah, and I agree. And that's another thing to say to the audience, is that you can outsource technical development as long as that is done in a quality managed way. If they just build it and can't pass you any documentation, then you won't get regulatory approval. You have to make sure whoever you're outsourcing it to is following the guidance and documenting appropriately, and that will help streamline things.
And it definitely brings you closer to the tech provider, as this pathway together with the notified body. I mean, you really have to work closely together.
Yeah, absolutely. Heinz.
I mean, you have to pass internal audits, the provider. I mean, we had a technology development part. I had to pass several audits. So that is all a pretty much pain to it. On the other hand, it's something you need to have to pass the requirements of the notified body. I would like to add one more thing in terms of, is there published evidence of what we are doing? As Vera said, I mean, for the clinical evaluation plan, there is this, I wouldn't say concerns, but hesitancy with regard to completely publish the clinical development plan. But we have external validations of our tool in the context of specific disease entities, where the question was, would a regular student, as opposed to ChatGPT, as opposed to other LLMs, as opposed to Valmed, be better or worse? And we did that in the context of one disease, which is multiple sclerosis. And what one claim is, the more complex, the more special, and the more deep the question gets, the better, and the more the difference is between a very generic and general LLM to our Valmed tool. So the more specific the question is, means the more you have to rely on existing literature that has to be specifically found, the better our tool is. Then the closed database and the reference to the database pans out more and more. This is what we claimed in the beginning. We have not really formally demonstrated in our clinical evaluation plan, but now external validation shows that.
That's
and
really
it's still ongoing, other evaluation, yeah.
So more studies ongoing. That's really interesting. So just to sort of unpack that a bit, if we kind of think about sort of medicine as a whole, there are things that are very common, which might appear much more often in medicine, and there's things that are very rare, which appear on the edges. So you're saying that maybe that because Valmed is linked deeply and controlled just to focus on validated information, it's perhaps doing better than large language models, which are perhaps averagely good at finding the common diseases and the common answers. So this is adding that kind of extra layer of security and safety around the edge cases a little bit more. I think that's really interesting to see, and I'll be interested to see those results when they come out. So you've been on a journey, haven't you? And I'm impressed that it's essentially just you two. I guess my other question is slightly more provocative to everyone else watching: is why do you think no one else has done this, considering there are billion-dollar monolithic companies all claiming to be able to revolutionize healthcare with large language models, but you have done it? Why do you think there's hesitancy? Why do you think people are not going to get regulated?
I think the size, although it's the small size, is a big advantage, because as we've now been discussing with many other companies how to partner, it takes time. I have been in the pharmaceutical industry for many years in big companies, and of course, big companies take time as big clinics. They do have their processes. And in the end, it's a lot of work and a lot of decisions to be made and a big risk to take. So I think this is much easier and especially faster for a small company and for two people who really agree easily. So I think this is one point. And another point is that we often see is that people, although it's not allowed, still use GPT for diagnosis and treatment, and it's for free. Although there's the hallucination, the liability, we are often told, in especially smaller clinics, that they haven't issued any standard operating procedures yet to forbid it. So I think this is the problem, that you can still live with it and you do have the creativity in your decision. So from our perspective, it's now easier, but in 1 year time, especially with when it comes to GDPR and taking a look at that, some healthcare professionals even submit patient data in GPT to ask for support of diagnosis and treatment. This will definitely change. And so I think the time is now, but it's not ready yet, as you are able to earn much more money with other things. So the big companies are focusing on the other features, I would say.
Yeah, and a very interesting point. I think we need to reiterate that is, if you are a clinician and you're just using standard ChatGPT, you really are running it at completely your own risk. There is now a validated, regulated product, which you would not be as much at risk for its use. So I think that's an important point to make. I've got two more questions before we move.
I would like Q&A.
Sorry, yes, Heinz, you go.
No, just to add something which I feel is maybe an important additional point. I don't think we are more clever. That we may have been very more agile than other companies, but for some companies, it's a very straightforward decision not to go into the liability issues and documentation stuff and regulatory stuff of CE. And this brings me to the point of traditional publishers. When we started with our MDAAM, our medical data architecture module, we thought this is not possible without teaming up with a traditional publisher, because a lot of the knowledge is harbored within traditional publisher. The fact and the reality is, and this is, I think, pretty interesting to note, and I learned that myself, is that 95+% of questions in the medical field are to be answered by publicly available literature, guidelines, regulatory documents. If you cleverly put them together, you have a extremely massive and powerful data architecture. The publishers clearly have no interest. And I saw one question that meta summaries for clinical studies, as in PubMed, they are already quite good. I mean, if you're going into a research and search tool, you might end with some question at the paywall. But for the general question of diagnosis and treatment in a regulatory context for reimbursement and so forth, most of the informations are indeed freely available. And this is what we provide with Valmed. So I don't want to overcome the traditional publishers model, but in a way, this is a learning point we made over our development. They do not have interest in a CE solution. That is my opinion. Why would they?
So I've got a couple more questions before we move to Q&A. Lessons have you learned that you could perhaps pass on to anybody else who wants to get a large language model based medical device regulatory approved? Is there anything you wish you knew at the start that you could tell people you need to watch out for this, or was there any particular part of the process that you could give any advice on?
So my advice is the earlier you have the discussion and meeting with the notified body, the better it is, because you can align on, discuss, propose. Of course, they never advise you, but still this interaction is key, and the earlier the better. So I saw the question that how long did it take? In the end, when we decided to go for Prof Valmed having it 2B, we immediately reached out to the notified body, and it still took us 1.5 years. And I would say Heinz and I are always fully aligned. So we never had any internal meetings that delayed things. Although, and still, we had to have this 1.5 years, and we were advised from the regulatory agency. We received this advice, but still, my advice would be, reach out to a notified body as fast as you can, because of course they are limited when it comes to resources, timings, slots for audits. So we had to be flexible here. They told us when they would come for an audit and so on. So I think this interaction is really key here.
Yeah, we see that problem.
And the second learning point I would add is give yourself timelines and deadlines and milestones. If you're looking for first get the perfect product and then start to discuss with a notified body, this is the wrong way around. So we took the full risk of not really knowing how fast we get to this point, but we simply told ourselves the next audit is in 2 months, and until then we have to get it done.
Yeah.
And I would say it helped a lot that we are both very impatient.
Patience, a bit of stubbornness. So the good learning points. We always say to our clients, the earlier you can engage with regulations and the authorities, the better. It's always better to have those conversations and to realize that they are just humans too, and they just want to see safe and effective technology. They're not trying to be a blocker to anything.
Yeah.
So we're going to move to our Q&A session now. So we've got some comments coming in. We can pick up some of these things. So the top comment.
Happy to pick one up, as we often receive this question on being bootstrapped and the role of the pharmaceutical industry. So we only do have the documents that Heinz presented just some minutes ago. So it's no bias towards any pharmaceutical company. And the reason why they supported us is that they were able to use it, as I said in the beginning, for their medical education and medical information. So they receive questions that they can now answer with Prof Valmed, of course, claiming they use an innovative tool, and this is of course sexy for the pharmaceutical companies, but this was the reason they supported us. And we were, of course, we are really active on LinkedIn. We were promoting the collaboration that we do have, and this was the reason why we were able to be and stay bootstrapped until today.
Brilliant. So let's go through some of these questions on the screen. The second question here is, do you think 2B is the best classification, and why? I think they mean it. Do you think it's the most appropriate one for your device, and why?
Yeah, I think for our device, it was the perfect decision. I mean, class 3, highest risk, we didn't have to go for this. So this was not to be discussed. And as I said, we didn't go for 2A, as this wouldn't really support us on our way from a long-term perspective. We all see the tech developments every day, and we would not be able to reflect those developments and to be that agile if we just went for 2A. So I think there's no other opportunity to go for 2B, especially as we foresee change every day.
Yeah, and also you're not claiming to be class 3. You're not saying like you have to rely on this information. That, you know, the AI is going to be correct the whole time. You're allowing the clinician to absorb that information and use it as a reference point for their own clinical decision making. So
yeah, it will only be a co-pilot. So in the end, the decision will always be with the healthcare professional. So I think we of course received the question, well, what happens if they just rely on the tool? But I think when you take a look at adoption of those tools, we are not yet there. So of course we do have a disclaimer, terms of use and so on. But still, I think the healthcare professional will take the decision on their own, and this is just a co-pilot. But if we convince him or her that their diagnosis and treatment decision can be better with a tool like Prof Valmed, they should always use it.
Another question here.
There's a funny.
He says that since you've used GPT 4.0 as the engine, what documentation did you get from OpenAI? So this is the SOUP, the software of unknown provenance point that Heinz mentioned earlier. How did you sort of verify, validate this third-party large language model into your medical device?
So it's a SOUP. And we were really transparent about this when the notified body, also saying when it comes to geopolitical challenges at the moment and discussions that we would perhaps change this model behind, but we didn't need to reach out to OpenAI to have any documentation. And the notified body, sorry, Heinz, go first, please.
No, what we had to reach out is that we had to guarantee that our information and link to our database is not used for any OpenAI training. So there is a custom version and a cloud protected version that we have. The other thing is that we have to update, of course, transparently if we change the GPT in the back, and then we have to do a clinical validation because that might change the output. But within our development, we didn't change it yet, but we have the ability to change it. We often get the question, what happens if 4.0 in itself changes within 4.0 and we don't realize this is a possibility for change? I do not really have an answer. We are not required to transparently update on any internal updates from the respective GPT within one version.
Okay. Yeah, because that's a question I think gets asked a lot in this space, is how would you verify, validate a third-party model as SOUP? And indeed, if you're going to go for FDA, that goes into your SBOM, which is your supplier's bill of materials. And I guess you're going to presumably you have a contract with, you pay for access to ChatGPT 4.0. So you have relative control over that version of the model, even though you might not have control over the tinkering that they might be doing around the edges. Presumably you have processes in place should you notice that performance is degrading from that model, and you have processes in place to be able to monitor for that.
Post-market surveillance, for sure, yes.
Brilliant. We've mentioned your notified body a lot, but we haven't actually named them. So if someone's asked, who was the notified body?
It's the MDC, and we are open and transparent about this. And we chose them because they were issuing a paper on continuous learning devices. So this was the reason why we saw this paper, as when reaching out to you, checking LinkedIn and the press, and that sounded like they were really open to this, and this was the start of the relationship.
Yeah. Diana Han has asked, just from a performance perspective, what makes your validated curation and medical device framework superior to someone who simply uploads curated medical literature to a general LLM tool? So why, I guess she's asking, is like, why can't I just give some documents to my own LLM and ask it medical questions?
Regardless the number of 40 million documents, I would leave it to Heinz and the not being approved for diagnosis and treatment support.
Of course, yours is approved for use, whereas general LLM is not.
That's the point. And I mean, you are not able to upload 40 million documents. This is the one thing. And it's not just uploading, it's which document is uploaded, which is updated when and how. And this is, I think, this is part of the certification. So I think that no, just one person is not able to upload it and use it.
Heinz, did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, it's the library, so the quality of the library, but also the way the library is processed in communication with the general LLM. So our impression is that this is, I mean, otherwise you more or less have purely the LLM, and you can upload up to currently 10 documents or so, and they are more or less, yeah, set in reference to the LLM, while our tool is more or less set much more in reference to the library than the LLM. So the LLM is only used for, let's say, the conversational and the combinatorial power, not for the quality of the documents. And this is actually why the library, the medical data architecture, but the way how it's chunked and vectorized is in itself an IP and a value, which is hard to achieve just by doing it homebrew.
Yeah. On IP, I did forget to ask, have you patented the process? Do you think it's possible to patent it?
I mean, I'm a lawyer, but no patent lawyer. And, you know, we all have our special fields, and we reached out to one, and it's not that likely. So we didn't go for this.
Okay, fine. But you've trademarked it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Prof Valmed is a trademark, and the Valmed Universe and our Valmed Academy, which we offer with Prof Valmed, as we think we need to educate the healthcare professional how to use AI. So this is why it always goes along with the academy as well.
All right, we've got time for a couple more questions. Alexander asks, is the system prompt the only hallucination risk mitigation, or are there other mitigations, such as external non-large language model components pre-output? Perhaps Heinz, you can answer on the
No, it's really the no, it's really the only hallucination risk mitigation is control of the system prompt, and the way how the prompt is funneled to the documents. We don't have any external LLM to validate against, so we mostly rely on that the information is to be found in the given underlying references. And if it's not, then it's an hallucination. That would be our take. I have a very simple example. So one discussion we had with the notified body is, what do you do if your tool recommends use 10 kilogram of aspirin for headache? And we say, well, if the system says it and it's written like that in one of the references, then it's not a problem of the system. It's a problem of the underlying reference.
Let's hope there's no references that say that.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll finish on this last question, which is most important. If a hospital wants to use the system, how can they go about it? How can people, get hold of this device and start using it?
They should reach out to us on our website. So they are, of course, single licenses, but also licenses for the whole hospital, for the different clinics or medical fields. So they should just check out profvalmed.com and reach out to us.
Brilliant. Well, we are on time. It has been a fascinating hour. Thank you to all of those who attended. I think we've had up to 150 people watching on the live stream, and this is recorded. It will be available on LinkedIn afterwards. So just finally, just to say thank you so much to Vera and Heinz for taking the time. Congratulations, it truly is a world's first. And good luck with the future. And I hope that you can build off the successes that you've achieved so far. To anybody else who's wanting to bring one to market and you're not quite sure, you can always reach out to Hardian. We'd love to help you get a CE mark for large language model based devices and beyond. But for now, thank you so much to our guests and thank you to the audience. And we are going to end the stream there. So bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, you.